You spent $500, $1,000, maybe $2,000 on an AV receiver. You set up your speakers, ran the auto calibration, and sat down expecting cinema quality surround sound. But something feels flat. Explosions don't hit the way they should. The surround effects feel weak. Action sequences lack that physical chest-thumping impact you expected. You start wondering whether you bought the wrong receiver, or whether your speakers aren't good enough, or whether surround sound is just overhyped. Here's the truth. Your receiver is probably fine, and your speakers are probably fine. There is one single setting buried in your AV menu that is silently crushing your audio and making a premium system sound mediocre. And 99% of people have it switched on right now without knowing it. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what it is, where to find it, and what your system actually sounds like when it's turned off. Subscribe and hit the like button before we get into this. And drop a comment telling me which AV receiver you're using and whether your surround sound has ever felt weaker than you expected. Let's fix this. The setting nobody talks about. The setting responsible for this problem goes by several names depending on which brand of receiver you own. On Denon and Marantz receivers, it's called Loudness Management. On Yamaha, it appears as Night Mode or Sound Diffusion. Sony labels it AVOL or Advanced Auto Volume. Onkyo and Pioneer call it Dynamic Compression or Loudness Management. The name changes, but the function is identical across every brand. It applies dynamic range compression to your audio in real time, making loud sounds quieter and quiet sounds louder, flattening everything toward a uniform average volume level. On the surface, this sounds like it might be helpful. More consistent volume means you don't have to reach for the remote during quiet dialogue scenes, right? But what this setting actually does to your surround sound experience is the opposite of helpful. It systematically dismantles the very qualities that make surround sound immersive. And it does it so quietly and so consistently that most people never realize their system has been running in a compromised state from the moment they set it up. Why dynamic range is everything? To understand why this setting is so destructive, you need to understand what dynamic range actually means for your listening experience. Dynamic range is the difference between the loudest and the quietest moments in a piece of audio. In a well-mixed film, this range can be enormous. A character whispering in a tense scene might be at a very low volume level, and the explosion that follows might be 30, 40, or even 50 decibels louder. That contrast is not a mistake, and it's not poor mixing. It's intentional, deliberate sound design that creates emotional impact. The quiet makes the loud feel powerful, and the loud makes the quiet feel tense and intimate. Think about how this works in real life. If you're in a completely silent room and someone drops a book, it sounds shockingly loud. If you're at a loud party and someone drops that same book, you barely notice. Your perception of sound is entirely relative to what came before it. Film sound designers understand this deeply, and they craft audio mixes that use silence and quiet moments as tools to amplify the impact of loud moments. When an action sequence erupts after a long, quiet scene, the contrast is what delivers the physical, visceral punch that makes you feel like you're inside the movie. Loudness management destroys this entirely. By compressing the dynamic range, it brings the loud moments down and pushes the quiet moments up until everything sits at roughly the same perceived volume level. The explosion still happens, but it doesn't hit you the way it should, because the quiet that preceded it was already too loud for the contrast to register. The surround effects still play, but they feel like background noise rather than immersive audio because their level relative to the rest of the mix has been artificially suppressed. Your expensive, capable receiver is working against the very content it's supposed to reproduce. What it does to your surround channel specifically? Here's the part that most people don't realize and that makes this setting particularly damaging for surround sound specifically. Loudness management doesn't just compress the overall audio. It also actively reduces the level of your surround and rear channels, sometimes by as much as 8.5 decibels. To put that in perspective, a reduction of 3 decibels is roughly perceived as half the loudness. 8.5 decibels is a dramatic reduction that effectively makes your surround speakers whisper when they should be speaking at full voice. This is why so many people set up 7-speaker or 11-speaker Atmos systems and still feel like the sound is mostly coming from the front. It's not because the surround channels aren't working, it's because this single setting is throttling them to a fraction of their intended output level. The three-dimensional sound field that surround sound is supposed to create, with audio moving smoothly from the front to the sides to behind you, collapses because the side and rear channels are operating at such a reduced level that the front speakers dominate everything. You end up with an expensive multi-channel system that essentially performs like an enhanced stereo setup. Why your receiver turned it on without telling you? The frustrating part about this is that most people didn't consciously enable this setting. It turns on by itself. On many receivers, loudness management defaults to auto when you first power up the unit or after a factory reset. Auto mode means the receiver makes its own decision about when to apply compression. And in most cases, it applies it broadly and aggressively. You go through the setup process, run the auto calibration, and never visit the advanced audio settings because everything seems to be working. But loudness management is running in the background the entire time, shaping your audio in ways you never asked for. The naming doesn't help either. Loudness management sounds like it's managing loudness in your favor, like a helpful feature that keeps things under control. Night mode sounds like a convenience setting for late viewing rather than something that fundamentally alters your audio quality. Marketing materials describe these features as providing even volume and consistent levels, which sounds appealing. Nobody names a setting surround sound destroyer or dynamic range crusher, so people leave it on assuming it's doing something positive. The original intent behind this feature was actually legitimate. Watching a film at night when you don't want to disturb family members or neighbors is a real scenario, and having explosions at full cinematic volume while people are sleeping nearby is a genuine problem. Night mode was designed for exactly that situation, as a compromise setting that lets you watch without the full dynamic range. The issue is that it shipped as a default or auto-enabled feature rather than something you consciously choose for a specific situation, and the vast majority of people never turn it off even when they're watching in a perfectly normal listening environment during the day at reasonable volumes. How to find and disable it on your receiver? Let's get specific about where to find this setting. Because the menu structure varies by brand and it's not always in an obvious location. On Denon and Marantz receivers, go into the audio menu, then navigate to surround parameters, and look for loudness management. Set it to off. This is the most important change you can make on these receivers, and it should be one of the first things you do after running Odyssey calibration. On Yamaha receivers, go into the audio settings menu and look for sound diffusion or night mode depending on your model. Set it to off. Yamaha's implementation is particularly aggressive, so the improvement after disabling it tends to be very noticeable. On Sony receivers, go to audio settings and look for ATVOL or advanced auto volume. Disable it completely. On Onkyo and Pioneer receivers, look in the audio settings for dynamic compression or loudness management and set it to off. If you're having trouble finding it, the quickest approach is to search your specific receiver model number along with the term loudness management or night mode in a browser. The owner's manual will have the exact menu path. Some receivers also have a shortcut through the remote or front panel display that lets you toggle these settings without going deep into menus. Spend 5 minutes finding this setting and turning it off, because the improvement you'll hear is immediate and significant. What you'll hear immediately after turning it off, when you disable loudness management and play any well-mixed film or music through your system, the change is not subtle. The first thing most people notice is that bass becomes more physical and impactful. The low end that was being compressed and rounded off suddenly arrives with its full weight. And action sequences feel like they have real punch behind them. Dialogue, which you might have expected to become harder to hear without compression helping it stay consistent, often becomes clearer rather than muddier, because the frequency compression that was affecting the vocal range gets removed, and voices become more defined and present. The surround envelopment is where the transformation is most dramatic. With loudness management off and your surround channels playing at their calibrated levels rather than being artificially suppressed, the three-dimensional sound field your system is capable of suddenly becomes real. Sound moves around the room properly. Rear effects arrive with genuine presence. The difference between your front soundstage and your surround field is distinct and meaningful rather than everything blending into a vague fog of audio coming mostly from the front. This is what your receiver was supposed to sound like from the first day you set it up. Other settings that are also quietly hurting you while you're in the settings menu fixing loudness management. There are a few other settings worth checking because they can also compromise your audio quality in ways that are easy to miss. Cinema Ec is a setting on some receivers that softens the high-frequency response of the audio, rolling off the treble to simulate the acoustic character of a cinema environment. Unless your speakers have genuinely harsh or fatiguing high frequencies, Cinema Ec is doing more harm than good by removing detail and air from the sound. Turn it off and see whether your speakers actually need it before deciding to leave it on. Dynamic Ec is different from loudness management and worth understanding separately. Dynamic Ec is a feature that adjusts the frequency balance of the audio at low listening volumes to compensate for the way human hearing perceives bass and treble less effectively at quiet levels. At low volumes, below what's called reference listening level, Dynamic Ec can actually be helpful because it prevents the mix from sounding thin and bass-light when you're watching quietly. At higher, more normal listening volumes, turn it off and let the original mix play as intended. Speaker size settings also deserve a check while you're in the menu. If your receiver has your surround or front speakers set to large, it's sending them full-range audio including deep bass frequencies that small or medium speakers can't reproduce cleanly. Setting your speakers to small with an appropriate crossover, typically around 80 Hz for most bookshelf or surround speakers, tells the receiver to redirect the bass to your subwoofer where it belongs. This improves clarity across all your speakers, because they're no longer straining to reproduce frequencies they can't handle properly. And it makes your subwoofer work more effectively because it's receiving all the low-frequency content rather than sharing the job poorly with speakers that aren't equipped for it. The bigger picture? Here's what makes this story particularly worth telling. People spend significant money on AV receivers, sometimes far more than they spend on the speakers themselves, because they believe a better receiver will deliver a better sound experience. And that's true, but only if the receiver is actually configured to perform at its capability. A $2,000 receiver running with loudness management enabled will sound worse than a $500 receiver with it turned off, because the expensive receiver's superior processing and power are being overridden by a compression algorithm that was designed for nighttime convenience viewing. The gap between what most people's systems actually sound like and what those same systems are capable of is genuinely surprising. The hardware is good. The speakers are capable. The receiver has the processing power to create a convincing three-dimensional sound field, but a handful of poorly chosen default settings, led by loudness management, are preventing that capability from ever reaching your ears. Fixing it costs nothing and takes less than 10 minutes. The bottom line is this: if your surround sound has ever felt flat, weak, front-heavy, or just less impressive than you expected, the first place to look is your receiver's loudness management or night mode setting. Turn it off. Then check Cinema Ec and turn that off too. Verify your speaker sizes are set to small with proper crossover settings. And if you're listening at normal volumes, turn off Dynamic Ec as well. These changes cost you nothing, take a few minutes, and will make your system sound like you finally got the setup you paid for. The hardware was ready the whole time. It just needed the settings to match. If this video just changed how your system sounds, please hit the like button and share it with anyone you know who's been disappointed by their surround setup. Drop a comment below telling me what receiver you have and whether you found loudness management turned on. I want to know how many people this is actually affecting. And subscribe if you haven't already, because we've got more home theater content coming that will help you squeeze every bit of performance out of the system you already own. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.